Hello, welcome back. I recently found out that they are going to be naming the boy in the box America's Unknown Child. I believe it was 65 years ago. This case hasn't been solved, and the little boy, nobody could figure out his name. So it's a great feeling in crime history that this child is finally going to be named and that maybe we can find out what happened to this little boy. I also thought it would be a good time to introduce you guys to one of my favorite books. It's called The Murder Room. This book follows three really well-known, I believe one's a profiler, one's a detective, and one is a forensic artist. It's a really good book, but it has a couple excerpts about the boy in the box, and I wanted to read those to you so you could get a sense of how good this book really is, and hopefully give a little justice to the boy in the box's story. I'm going to start with Bill Fleischer. As a child, he was in a grocery store, and he's seen a poster for the boy in the box, and that's where I'll start, and then I'll go through the excerpt of the boy being found, and then the police officers in the morgue. And I feel like that is probably the best way to get a feel for this book and the story of the boy in the box. Now, the boy's eye caught a poster on a wall near the front of the store. It intrigued him. From a distance, it looked like a portrait of three heads. He walked toward it, and up close froze in fear. A ghostly, shrunken face stared at him, with lifeless blue eyes. It was a pale, bloodless face, the face of a dead boy. On either side of the ghastly face were profile photographs of the child. The side of the head, like the face, was blistered in bruises and cuts. But the emotionless blue eyes held him fast. He looked at the eyelids, frail and broken as the crushed wings of a butterfly. Philadelphia Police Department. Information wanted, the poster said. The print underneath said the unknown child had been brutally murdered and found 2 weeks ago in the woods of Fox Chase. Police were looking for the boy's name and his killer. Notify Homicide Unit Detectives Headquarters, City Hall, Philadelphia, at any time, day or night, in person or telephone, Municipal 69700. For an instant, the left eye seemed to glow yellow. Billy had never seen a dead person. He hadn't heard the prayer to the blessed judge of truth, the rabbi's wisdom that men were mortals and can't understand, can only accept God's will. His father had not prepared him. No one could have prepared him. Death whispers uniquely to each man. But its overture to Billy was beyond the understanding of mid-20th century adults. No less a child, in the limpid eye, he had seen a glimpse of the darkest evil known to humankind. That was on page 33, 34 of The Murder Room. Now I'm going to go back to chapter 4, starting on page 23. The chapter is called A Little Child Shall Lead Them. On Saturday, February 23rd, 1957, a cold rain spattered a lonely country road on the northern edge of Philadelphia, falling on a field of brush and vines, slowly claiming an old cardboard box behind the tree line. Inside the box lay a small blue-eyed boy of perfect tapered form, naked and laid out with his arms by his side, like a forgotten boy king of Egypt. His sarcophagus was a J.C. Penney box of corrugated cardboard, 3 feet long and 18 inches wide, marked fragile, handle with care. Great and prolonged care had been taken. The boy had been washed and groomed and wrapped in a coarse Navajo blanket, as if ritually prepared for the next life. His hair was roughly chopped, his fingernails trimmed with a loving touch. His life had been extinguished in an ancient ritual designed to harvest his innocence and beauty by inflicting on him the greatest of cruelties. These were the abominable mixing of love and tenderness with betrayal, torture, and terror, culminating in the horror of his murder, which alone provided the climax for the killer or killers. The ritual was often confused with Satanism, but bowed to neither God nor the devil. In the soft landscape of eastern Pennsylvania, in the middle of Eisenhower 1950s, no one had a clue what the signs meant. The boy was scarred with deep cuts and bruises from head to toe. He was only 3 feet, 4 inches tall, but he was too long for the box, and had been curled into the little cardboard coffin to fit. His head peeked out, open-end, sightless eyes fixed on the sky. Moles tunneled under the wild grass that sprouted around the boy. Mice and insects rustled nearby in the underbrush, sensing the seeping blood. He lay only 15 feet from the road, but remained unseen. The narrow one-lane road was mostly quiet. The field was a last wild green patch surrounded by the city, by hospitals and police stations, and thousands of suburban homes. But the surrounding fields had changed little since the colonial horses thundered and hounds bayed their call over the Fox Chase Inn. Now and again, an automobile tunneled on the road south through the mist of the Veery Road, past the woods and fields to the Veery House, still standing, once invaded by the British. Then the road fell quiet again. It was a remote grave, carefully chosen. It was warm for February, but the rain cut with a raw chill. The land was hushed in an attitude of waiting. There had not been much snow for years, but the big storms were coming. The oceans were spinning. The 30-year cycle, climatic changes that would turn the 1960s into the snowiest decade in the century, were already in the air. The boy was decomposing very slowly in the cold. The animals had not gotten to him yet. Clouds fell. Sun dried the eyes and little face. Night came and went. Orion the hunter glittered in the south. Jupiter was bright. The field fell dark and quiet. The boy's lips white as the moon, sailing with the winter stars. The sun rose without warmth. There was no movement left in him except gravity drawing his blood downward in his body. That Saturday, city people veered north to a city park with a creek Audubon had admired more than 100 years earlier. The priest turned into the quiet Good Shepherd, home for wayward girls, deep in the field across the street. In the afternoon, John Stachwick was bicycling by to play basketball at the Catholic Church gymnasium, when suddenly he left his bike by the tree line and walked into the field. He was nervous but excited. Stachwick was 18 years old, the son of Polish immigrants who spoke little English, and he was a trapper. He kept 19 muskrat traps in the woods and field he lived nearby. They were easy to check, but he hadn't even set them, and the season was almost over. He had been afraid for weeks to set the traps since his older brother discovered a body hanging on the limb of a tree in the nearby woods. The pale, dangling man haunted his nightmares. So did the memory of his mother and father when the Philadelphia patrolman came to the house to take a report from his brother about the suicide. Refugees from the Soviet police state. They trembled as if it were Stalin's dreaded NKVD who'd snatched many of their friends in the night, never to be seen again. The dense undergrowth stretching back from the tree line by the road was perfect cover for a small game, but the teenager was startled and upset. 2 of his muskrat traps were set. Who would have fooled with his traps? Combined with the suicide, the lonely field gave him an eerie feeling. He was about to leave when he saw a long rectangular box in a tangle of vines. The field was a dumping ground, and he was curious to see what was in it. He grabbed it on one end and pulled it upright. But it was heavy, and he put it down. Walking around it, he looked into the open end for a long moment. He decided not to play basketball that day. Stotchwick rushed home, determined not to tell his brother, his parents, or anyone what he had seen near the woods of the hanging man. He didn't want the police to return and terrify his family. 2 days later, on the afternoon of Monday, the 25th, Frank Guthrum, a junior at La Salle University, was taking the country road home from classes when he pulled over and parked by a tree line. Guthrum was an older student in his mid-20s who'd had trouble adjusting to student life. 2 weeks earlier, on February 11th, he'd braked for a rabbit that ran in front of his car and into the field. On a whim, he followed the rabbit into the underbrush. He lost sight of the rabbit but found 2 steel traps and decided to set them. Now it was 3:15, still light enough to see what had been caught in the steel jaws. He was disappointed to find that the traps were empty, but about 15 feet from the road, at the intersection of 2 footpaths, was a curiosity, a long cardboard box snared by the underbrush. Guthrum leaned down and saw a small head, white as porcelain, the limp figure wrapped in a blanket. A doll? A big doll? He looked again at the bruises on the small head, the chopped blonde hair. Not a doll. Guthrum hurried home. That evening he told his brother, who was a priest, what he had seen, but he decided not to call the police. He didn't want to get involved, and the police were already watching him. They'd recently accused him of being a peeping Tom, pretending to chase rabbits in the woods in order to spy on the wayward girls in the Good Shepherd home across the street. The last thing he wanted was close questioning about the box. The next morning, Tuesday, the 26th, Guthrum was driving to school when he heard on the car radio the police were searching for a possible kidnap victim, Mary Jane Barker, 4 years old, missing from Belmore, New Jersey. Belmore was just across the river from Philadelphia. When he got to school, he sought advice from 2 faculty advisors and spoke with his brother again. The priest said, "You know what you have to do." At 10:10 a.m., he called the police. The Philadelphia Police Department was headquartered in the French Empire stone edifice of City Hall, with the stone relief of Moses, the lawgiver, glowing over the judicial entrance. But despite the antiquated rooms, the force was among the most modern in the country. Patrolmen drove red 1955 Chevrolet paneled wagons, among the first heavy-duty cruisers designed especially for police. Sergeant Charles Gargani took Guthrum's call in the Homicide Bureau, then ordered a radio message broadcast to all the red cars. Investigate a cardboard box in the woods, Susquehanna Road, across from the girl's home. Could be a body inside, or could be a doll. Patrolman Sam Weinstein was skeptical and annoyed as he trudged into the muddy field through the cold rain. A stout man with a square head and a broad nose, Weinstein was a streetwise rookie cop, 30 years old, with a wife and 2 kids. He'd already made his name in the department as a tough guy, quick to use his fists. Weinstein had seen combat in the Pacific of the World War II. His father had been murdered when he was in the womb. His mother died when he was a toddler. He'd been raised in South Philadelphia by an uncle and aunt who were Lutheran, but kept his dead mother's wish to raise him Jewish. Weinstein had a surly attitude nobody liked unless he was on their side. Ahead he saw Patrolman Elmer Palmer, a fellow rookie, and called out a friendly greeting, but Palmer was standing quietly by the lopsided cardboard box with his face broken. Weinstein looked in the box and was staggered. He'd seen enough suffering and death for 3 lifetimes, but he'd never seen a murdered child. Few cops had, in Philadelphia in the 1950s. Murder happened to adults at the hand of someone they knew, jealous spouse, ex-partner. The rare body in the field was a gin-smelling hobo, an old drifter. 2 homicide detectives joined the group around the body in their dark overcoats and fedoras, accompanied by Dr. Joseph Spellman, the city's chief medical examiner. More detectives and street cops arrived, and a captain sent the uniforms into the field in their shiny, wet raincoats, kicking the underbrush for evidence. 17 feet from the body, they found a men's blue Ivy League cap, size 718. The ambulance pulled away, and Weinstein volunteered to take the boy out of the box. He lifted the small corpse gingerly, bruises all up and down. Dr. Spellman said, bruises and cuts too deep for a child to get falling off of a bicycle. Deep bruises around the head looked like thumbprints from an adult trying to steady the child for a haircut. It was a violent beating, all right, but the medical examiner said he'd need the autopsy to determine the cause of death. Weinstein held the boy instinctively, trying to shield him from the rain. Suddenly, he felt anger surging through him. He looked at Palmer and saw the same fury in his friend's eyes. Whoever did this should burn in hell. But Weinstein couldn't imagine who would do such a thing. None of them could. The detectives were speculating that a mother or father, poor and pushed to the edge, had lost control during a bath and had been surprised trying to give the only burial they could afford. The dead boy somehow represented something beyond their grasp. Criminals were changing. Everything was changing. Philadelphia had watched Pat Boone sing at President Eisenhower's inaugural ball the month before. The next month, thousands of fans would crowd an Elvis Presley concert in Philadelphia. Everywhere, the old order was dying and the new being born. A month before, the actor Humphrey Bogart, an icon for traditional masculinity, had died in Los Angeles. The same week, the Wham-O Company made the first Frisbee for a new and liberated generation. Powerful new currents were upwelling, like an ocean turning over. Freedom and authenticity were the watchwords of the coming age of Aquarius. Old injustices were being addressed, old boundaries smashed, deep longings unleashed. Killers were exploring new freedoms, finding deeper and more authentic selves, too. The patrolman looked into the small blue eyes, the dull orbs reflecting his own. He was overcome by sadness, tempered by thoughts he couldn't explain. I saw so much pain and terror there, he said. The little face seemed to cry out to him. Why did this happen? Why would somebody do this to me? His eyes met Palmer's again with shared emotion. We'll get the son of a bitch, no matter what it takes. But who was the son of a bitch? What was the answer? Weinstein was a proud man, and it was difficult for him to admit. I don't have an answer for that. He sensed he might never have an answer. It was beyond him. He felt shattered. The ambulance door slammed shut, and Weinstein looked up at the gray February sky and the rain falling over the field. Now this is going to be the beginning of the Boy in the Box case's autopsy. This is on page 34 of The Murder Room. The boy lay on a cold metal table in the city morgue. Outside the windowless chamber, the night was dark and bitterly cold. But now the boy was bathed in warm, bright light. The medical examiner measured him at 40 inches long, 30 pounds. He looked so small. Bill Kelly prepared his inks, rollers, and clean white paper. As the police department principal fingerprinter, he was one of Death's numerous attendants. He was trained to stoically touch the cold flesh of the dead, but his boy looked just like the fingerprinter's 4-year-old son. His little feet fit into Kelly's palm. The fingerprinter bowed his head and quietly asked the blessed mother for strength and guidance. The head of the Philadelphia Police Identification Unit, Kelly was 29 years old, a tall Irishman, a devout Roman Catholic, with shining blue eyes that reflected compassion rather than mirth. The fingerprinter was a devoutly religious man who believed children were a gift from God. He was a father of 2, with a third on the way. He and Ruth Ann dreamed of having as many as the Almighty would provide. To feed the extra mouths, he was picking up work as a wedding photographer, a joyful interlude between corpses. On closer inspection, Kelly saw the boy was painfully thin. University of Pennsylvania anthropologist Wilton Krogman, one of the world's foremost experts on human anatomy, known by the FBI as the Bone Detective, examined him with his young assistant Bill Bass, who would later found the Tennessee Body Farm to study decomposing human remains for law enforcement. Krogman calculated the boy had nearly the height of a 4-year-old, but the weight of a 2-year-old. That meant starvation, malnutrition. X-rays of the legs showed scars on the long bones from halted growth. The boy had suffered in ill health for at least a year. Kelly's heart clenched as he inked the tiny hands and feet, then pressed the prints onto a clean paper. He believed in God, but if he indeed tipped the wings of every sparrow in the flight, what was the purpose for this? Kelly saw other things with the cop's eyes, the terrible cuts and bruises on the head and all over the body. The skin of one hand and foot withered from water immersion. The washerwoman's effect. The narrow head looked like it had been squeezed like an overripe melon. These were the things Kelly, a civilian on the force, preferred not to contemplate, but he knew in his heart he was in the presence of evil, proof the devil existed as surely as did God. From his humble prayers, the comfort came to him that the boy could be hurt no more in life. He was in heaven. All Kelly could do was help redeem his soul with a name. A name would cut a powerful trail to the murderer, a killer who would be judged in this life as well as in the next. Neither task was his, but never had Kelly's work seemed so important. So, I wanted to read parts from this book because it's such a good book. You get to hear the detectives' points of views that worked on lots of cases. It's not just the boy in the box. That's just one small chapter, but you get to see the personality and the lives of these detectives, and you get to hear the story of some of these crimes as never before heard. I mean, when you read an article, it's mostly facts. Like, you hear the fact of what happened, but to actually feel and know how much the boy in the box affected people that's why I could only show that through this story. And I wanted to end where I ended because 65 years, there's detectives have come and gone, and people who have worked on the case have passed away, and people who have known the case and found it in their hearts to give this boy a grave and, do everything they can to figure out who this boy was. And we're finally going to know. I do not know at the time of me recording this video, but I feel blessed to have lived in a day and age where we can finally put this boy's name on his gravestone.